Amanda had been standing quietly on the courthouse steps, her phone hidden in her hand, capturing every word of the heated exchange. What Maggie and her lawyers had forgotten is a simple but devastating legal fact: Texas is a one-party consent state. That means as long as one person agrees to the recording, yes, even if that person is you, the evidence is admissible. And Amanda? She had just handed us a golden ticket. From that moment forward, the tide began to shift. The engineering validation was more than paperwork, it was poetry in motion. When EPA agent Kim arrived, clipboard in hand, she measured the creek's water flow, and her face lit up. The numbers lined up perfectly with the historical seasonal records. Exactly as I had predicted, the water wasn't flooding anyone, it was simply going back where it naturally belonged. Tony Riggs, my meticulous partner in this fight, documented every reading, every measurement, every drop. Together, we showed the world, this wasn't sabotage. This was restoration. For the first time in 18 long months, Mrs. Chen's garden irrigation system filled. You could see the relief in her eyes as water trickled into her rows of vegetables again. 3 family farms downstream sent word that their stock ponds were finally replenished. And when the owner of the local diner pulled up with coffee and warm homemade collages, setting them on the hood of his old pickup, he said the words that silenced even the loudest critics: "My daddy farmed this land. This is how it's supposed to be." Even Maggie's most loyal supporters began slipping away, their signs lowering, their voices fading. Because how long can you scream, "Flood," when all anyone sees is water returning peacefully to its rightful path? The truth was undeniable. Meanwhile, the legal and financial walls started closing in on the HOA's grand illusion. A cease and desist order from state investigators landed squarely on the construction company's desk. Overnight, every nail, every brick, every bulldozer was halted. Maggie soon discovered an even harsher blow: her own homeowner's insurance might be void, cancelled because of fraudulent water access claims. Her empire wasn't crumbling, it was imploding like a dam built from playing cards, collapsing under the weight of its own lies. But Maggie wasn't finished clawing at the walls. She grabbed her phone and called Rick, her voice sharp with panic. "Get your trucks down here and block that spillway." Rick, who clearly hadn't learned from watching his own security team dragged away in handcuffs, sent 3 concrete mixers barreling down the road. They deliberately dumped their loads across the creek bed in a sloppy attempt to block the water. Within minutes, federal agents stormed the scene. The truck drivers didn't even get to wipe the concrete dust off their hands before being arrested. Interfering with a federal environmental investigation isn't a slap on the wrist, it's a felony. Rick had just escalated his mess into criminal territory. The irony? The technical success was flawless. The creek flowed in balance, stable and calm, respecting both agriculture and the environment. Not one home flooded. Not one street was underwater. The creek stayed where it always had, proven by nearly half a century of seasonal records. My calculations, my Army Corps training, it all paid off with precision. But while the water was calm, the politics were boiling. City Councilman Martinez stepped forward, cameras flashing, his voice ringing out, "This corruption has made our city a laughingstock. Rick, you're finished. Resign immediately." The crowd roared, reporters scribbled, and the narrative flipped overnight. Federal investigators announced they were broadening their case, preparing to pursue RICO charges, racketeering, for systematic land fraud. Tony leaned toward me with a grin and whispered, "This is the smoking gun we needed." And then came the sweetest moment of all. Maggie, standing on the far side of the creek, her face red with rage, screamed across the flowing water, "You've destroyed everything. 35 families. Gone." I looked her dead in the eye, my voice steady, carrying over the water so every microphone caught it. "No, ma'am. I didn't destroy anything. I restored everything. Those families can buy their water rights, just like everyone else has to." The cameras caught it, the crowd heard it, and Maggie had no comeback. She stormed off, threatening federal lawsuits that would never see daylight. And as her shadow faded, the people began to gather, not as enemies, but as neighbors again. Miguel's family arrived with trays of homemade tamales, laughter filling the air. Mrs. Chen laid out a traditional Chinese tea ceremony, a quiet blessing for the restored creek. And for the first time in years, it felt like community again, real community. The kind built slowly, one drought at a time, one sacrifice at a time, one act of kindness at a time. And that's when I realized, this was never about revenge. This was about restoration, of land, of water, and of the ties that bind us together. The media didn't call it a feud anymore. They called it a victory. Environmental groups wasted no time praising the operation. To them, the spillway wasn't an act of defiance, it was a textbook model of ecosystem restoration. The headlines shifted almost overnight. What began as "Angry Veteran Floods Neighborhood" transformed into a new narrative, community reclaims stolen water. Sometimes the truth doesn't need to be forced, it flows naturally, like a creek finding its way back home. By the time 2 p.m. rolled around, Judge Walsh's courtroom was packed tighter than a can of sardines. Reporters crammed their cameras into the aisles, farmers in dusty boots squeezed against the polished shoes of HOA residents, and federal agents lined the back wall, arms crossed, watching everything. Even the people who couldn't get a seat pressed their faces against the glass outside. The tension in the air was electric. This wasn't just a legal hearing. This was a reckoning for an entire community. Maggie arrived like a general marching into battle. She didn't come alone, she brought a full-blown legal army. High-dollar Houston attorneys in crisp suits, expert witnesses armed with binders, and enough courtroom theatrics to make a Hollywood scriptwriter jealous. Gone were the tennis outfits and casual charm. Today she wore a conservative black dress, a string of pearls, and the carefully crafted expression of a woman fighting for innocent families. She played the part well. I, on the other hand, kept it simple. Just a plain button-down shirt and Pop's old cowboy hat. No theatrics. No army. Just me and Amanda. Because sometimes the strongest armor isn't a wall of attorneys, it's showing up exactly as you are, with nothing to hide. The courtroom itself was split like a wedding where the families hated each other. On the left, HOA supporters clutched signs that read, "Protect our kids," glaring at me like I was some sort of outlaw. On the right, farmers and locals sat with weathered hands, sunburned faces, and the kind of resolve you only earn from decades of hard work. Two sides, one room, and a truth waiting to come out. Maggie's attorney wasted no time in launching an all-out performance. He strode to the center, pointing at photos of muddy construction sites and waving claims of $2.7 million in supposed flood damage. He even wheeled in a psychiatrist, someone who had never once spoken to me, who read from newspaper clippings and proudly declared that I suffered from combat revenge fantasies. The attorney jabbed a finger at me, raising his voice for maximum drama. "Your Honor, this disturbed veteran is weaponizing military engineering knowledge to terrorize innocent families. He has turned water into a weapon of mass destruction." The crowd buzzed with whispers, gasps, and a few muffled laughs. To them, it sounded more like a movie script than reality. But before the noise could build into chaos, Amanda rose calmly to respond. She walked to the bench with quiet confidence and laid down our foundation brick by brick. First, she produced the 1978 Agricultural Flood Management Covenant, a legal document that required seasonal flooding for water sustainability. Then, EPA agent Kim stepped up, steady as ever, and testified under oath that my spillway operation had not caused damage but had instead restored the creek's natural flow. Historical photos spanning 6 decades backed her up, proving that the water levels were exactly where they belonged. That was the moment the energy in the room shifted. People began to realize this wasn't a story of destruction, it was a story of restoration. And here's a nugget of truth the jury and cameras couldn't ignore: when it comes to water disputes, legal water rights always outweigh shiny new developments. Especially when you have federal environmental agencies standing shoulder to shoulder with you. Then came the hammer blow. Tony Riggs, EPA enforcement officer, took the stand. His testimony hit like a wrecking ball. He laid out, step by step, how the HOA's development had violated not 1, not 2, but 3 separate federal environmental laws. He revealed evidence of systematic insurance fraud and documented how protected wildlife habitats had been bulldozed in the process. Judge Walsh shifted uncomfortably in his chair. You could practically see the calculation in his eyes. Was siding with Rick and Maggie worth the risk of federal obstruction charges? The weight of Washington suddenly pressed heavy on that courtroom. And then Amanda delivered the breaking point. She called Rick himself to the stand. Under oath, Rick cracked. He admitted to fast-tracking zoning changes while I was deployed overseas. He confessed to holding a financial stake in the construction company that built the illegal homes. And when Amanda played the recorded phone call, his own voice plotting to destroy property values, he lost his temper completely. Red-faced, he shot out of his chair, shouting, "This is a federal setup. We did nothing wrong." His voice echoed through the courtroom as security closed in. But his words, captured on tape, were now undeniable evidence of conspiracy. Still, the most powerful moments didn't come from legal arguments. They came from the people. Miguel Santos, a farmer whose family had worked that land for 3 generations, stood and told the court how the creek diversion had killed his crops. His voice cracked as he spoke of his grandfather's dreams drying up with the stolen water. You could feel the ache in every word. Then Mrs. Chen quietly held up photographs. In one, her garden bloomed with vegetables and flowers, green and alive. In the other, the same garden was brown, withered, dead. She didn't need to say much. Her dignity spoke volumes. Finally, Fire Chief Martinez testified that my spillway operation had been carried out with precision and zero safety violations. Downstream farmers backed him up, confirming that their water access had been restored, not damaged. Piece by piece, testimony by testimony, the courtroom wall seemed to close in on Maggie's empire. And this was only the beginning. Access to the creek had been fully restored. The farmers knew it. The environmental scientists knew it. And now, the entire courtroom was about to hear it too. Then came Maggie's turn, the performance she thought would save her empire. She stepped up to the stand, straightening her pearls, her voice trembling but carefully rehearsed. He came back from war damaged, Your Honor, she declared, pointing her manicured finger at me as if she were identifying a criminal. This man is taking revenge on innocent families. He's using psychological warfare against children. This so-called spillway operation is nothing short of environmental terrorism, designed to destroy property values and traumatize residents. Her words were sharp, designed to sting, but the courtroom could feel the hollowness behind them. Theatrics without truth can only go so far. When Amanda rose and called me to the stand, the entire room went silent. Reporters stopped scribbling, cameras steadied, and even the HOA supporters leaned forward, waiting to see what I would say. I didn't need theatrics. I carried Pop's weather journals with me, 40 years of careful notes on community water sharing, rainfall, creek levels, and neighborly agreements. I explained the Army Corps engineering calculations behind the spillway, breaking them down so even those with no technical background could understand. Then I turned directly to Judge Walsh. Your Honor, I didn't flood anybody. I didn't destroy homes. I restored a creek that had been stolen from my family, and from this community, for 45 years. The air felt different after that. People weren't looking at me like a defendant anymore. They were looking at me like a man defending something sacred. But Amanda wasn't done. Her final piece of evidence was the true mic drop moment. She revealed official documentation showing Maggie's Houston HOA had already paid $2.3 million in EPA fines for an identical creek diversion scheme. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was a pattern. A racket. The federal prosecutor stood immediately, his voice cutting through the shock of the room. Your Honor, based on this evidence, we are opening a criminal investigation into interstate water fraud conspiracy. The courtroom erupted. Reporters shouted questions, farmers cheered, and even some HOA residents stared at Maggie in disbelief. Judge Walsh, shifting uncomfortably, knew there was no escape. He ruled swiftly, all restraining order requests? Denied. My spillway operation? Legal and beneficial. The HOA's interference? Ordered to cease immediately. Then, with a pointed glare toward Rick, Judge Walsh issued his final warning: this court will not obstruct lawful federal environmental enforcement. Within minutes, federal agents moved in. Rick was escorted from the courthouse in handcuffs while banking investigators served fresh warrants. Maggie found herself cornered by reporters on the courthouse steps, their cameras flashing, microphones shoved in her face. She refused to comment, fleeing into her BMW and speeding away, probably dialing moving companies before she even left the parking lot. I walked out the courthouse doors to something I'll never forget: cheers. Farmers, environmentalists, townspeople, they weren't just celebrating a legal win. They were celebrating the return of justice. Amanda held an impromptu press conference, announcing the newly launched federal RICO investigation, while Miguel approached me, tears in his eyes, thanking me on behalf of every family who had suffered. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple: this was never about revenge. It was about doing right, by the land, and by the people who depend on it. The story didn't end there. 6 months later, justice flowed just as naturally as the creek itself. Rick Thornwell pled guilty to federal conspiracy charges. 3 years in federal prison. Maggie wasn't far behind. She faced $8.7 million in civil penalties and filed for bankruptcy faster than water rushing through an open spillway. The construction company paid $12 million in EPA fines and was permanently banned from federal contracts. The HOA itself collapsed, disbanded, and dissolved into history. In its place, residents built a new community association, this time centered on environmental stewardship instead of suburban greed. And me? My property value soared to $1.2 million, thanks to the federal environmental designation. But the real victory wasn't financial. It was restoration. The $340,000 settlement from the insurance fraud investigation didn't stay in my pocket. Instead, I used it to buy back Miguel's family farm at a tax auction, and then returned it to him debt-free. Watching him hand the deed to his children was worth more than any dollar figure. The creek, once nearly strangled by corruption, became a source of life again. Ecotourists flocked to fish, kayak, and birdwatch where McMansions were supposed to stand. Mrs. Chen's garden flourished so beautifully it was turned into a sustainable agriculture demonstration site. 3 farms downstream reported their best harvest in a decade. The local diner became the unofficial headquarters of the Willow Creek Restoration Association, where neighbors gathered to plan the next fight against corporate water theft. The results were undeniable. Within 4 months, the endangered Guadalupe bass population had recovered to pre-diversion levels. Protected wildlife thrived. And a community once divided by corruption was now united by water. The creek had always belonged to the land, and to the people who cherished it. All I did was set it free again. The Audubon Society soon reported something remarkable. 12 bird species had returned to the wetlands surrounding Willow Creek. Within weeks, Texas Parks and Wildlife stepped in, designating the creek as a critical wildlife corridor. That ruling meant permanent protection, not just for the creek, but for the generations yet to come. My spillway operation, once painted as reckless sabotage, became a case study in the Army Corps of Engineers training manual. Funny how sometimes the sweetest revenge is nothing more than doing your job exactly right. But beyond the headlines, I found something I didn't know I'd been missing: peace. I restored Pop's old farmhouse with sustainable materials, timber milled locally, solar panels on the roof, rain catchment barrels on the porch. Sarah even moved back from California, joining me to grow what we now call our agrarian resilience business. Together, we began to rebuild not just land, but a way of life. And Amanda? Let's just say fighting environmental crime side by side for months forged a bond no one could break. Turns out when you wrestle corruption shoulder to shoulder, you don't just find allies, you find family. The ripple effects spread across Texas faster than rainwater carving new channels. Environmental groups adopted the Willow Creek model as a blueprint to challenge illegal water diversion statewide. Federal agencies cited our case when rewriting enforcement guidelines for water rights. Before long, my phone started ringing nonstop. Communities across the country called me for advice on fighting HOA overreach. I didn't choose this role, but I'd become an unofficial consultant for the people. We even established the Pops Morrison Environmental Scholarship for rural students pursuing careers in water management. The first recipient was Miguel's daughter, Maria. Today, she's studying environmental engineering at UT Austin, determined to defend watersheds across Texas from the next Maggie who tries to steal what doesn't belong to her. Each year, the community now celebrates Creek Days, a festival of food, music, and resilience. There are booths for environmental education, fundraisers for veteran support, and a water rights defense fund that's already helped 6 other towns take their water back from corporate thieves. But my favorite part is simple. Every summer, I see kids splashing in that creek, laughing, swimming, throwing rocks into the water that once risked being paved over by concrete and corruption. That's the victory Pop would have cherished most. Every Sunday, I still visit his grave. I bring him a mason jar filled with creek water, just like he used to carry after heavy rains. I kneel down and whisper, "Thanks, Pop. The creek's singing again, just like you said it would." The Legacy Project now ensures our fight lasts forever. The Willow Creek Conservation Trust owns permanent development rights to the entire watershed. That means no future HOA, no corporation, no city council can ever steal this water again. It belongs to the people, permanently. And here's the twist Maggie never saw coming. Her case opened the floodgates, literally. Her Houston HOA faced federal RICO prosecution, and soon, 147 families across 3 different states filed water rights restoration lawsuits. What began as one veteran's fight became a national movement for environmental justice. Now, when I sit on my porch at dusk, watching the creek flow exactly where it belongs, I'm reminded of a truth Pop always believed in: some battles are worth giving everything you've got. Sometimes you do have to flood the valley to save the creek. But you never do it alone. You do it with neighbors, with community, with people who believe clean water belongs to everyone, not just those with the deepest pockets or the dirtiest politics. So if you're watching this and you're fighting your own battle, against HOA corruption, against environmental destruction, or against bureaucrats who think they own what nature gave us all, don't give up. Document everything. Build alliances. And remember, the law is on the side of those who protect the land, not those who exploit it. Drop a comment below and tell me about your HOA nightmare story. I read every single one, and I reply when I can, because these fights are easier when we stand together. And if you want to hear more stories of ordinary people standing up to corruption and winning, make sure you hit subscribe. Next week, I'm sharing the wild story of the city that tried to steal my neighbor's solar farm, so she cut the power to City Hall during the mayor's wedding reception. That's a story about a different kind of power, and how one engineer flipped the switch on municipal corruption. Because here's the truth, water always finds a way. Justice always finds a way. And when communities fight side by side, they don't just survive, they win. Willow Creek flows free, y'all. And it always will.